Hi, today I'm going to talk about how to take your three chords in a key that are major, your 1, 4, and 5 chords, C, F, and G in this case, and how to give them a little more nuance and darkness by either skipping down to the nearest minor chord or skipping up to the nearest minor chord. So I'd recommend you review the videos where I talk about how the C scale is what your chords are built out of, and how in any given key chords 1, 4, and 5 are major, chords 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and then chord 7 is kind of a substitution chord for the 5. So be sure and review my videos that talk about that. Okay, so for now let's get into the dark and light chords. So every major chord has two notes in common with two different minor chords. For example, the C major has these two notes, the C and E, in common with the A minor. So the C chord has two notes in common with the A minor. So one way to darken a C chord is to skip down to A minor. Likewise, the C major chord has two notes in common with the E minor. And I'm using bad fingering so you can see the keys better. C chord, two notes in common with the E minor. In any song in which I'm playing the C major chord, I can darken it a bit by skipping down to the closest minor chord, which in this case is A minor, or I can darken the chord but kind of have a lifty feel by raising up to the E minor. So C major can lift and darken by going to the E minor, or C major can darken by going down to A minor. This is also true with the other two major chords in a given key. So for example, the F major can lift up to A minor, or the F major chord can skip down to the D minor. So the D minors and the A minor are darker versions of the F chord, just like E minor and A minor are dark versions of the C chord. The G chord is the only one where there's a little bit of a difference, and that is if you're going to skip up to the nearest minor chord, the top note of that minor chord needs to be raised a half a step to change it into a B minor chord. Otherwise it would be a diminished chord and it really wouldn't darken the G chord. So in order to have the G major chord darkened by lifting to the nearest minor chord, you actually have to change one note to make that happen. So G, you can lift to the next minor chord by skipping up, or you can drop down by skipping down from the G major to the E minor. So just to review all that, we have C major can either lift and darken to the E minor, or C major can skip down to darken to the A minor. So that's a 1 chord to the 3 chord, 1 chord to the 6 chord. And likewise, the F major chord can either lift to go to the minor chord and darken the feel of the sound, or the F major chord can skip down to drop into the nearest minor chord. So that'd be the 4 chord to the 6 chord, or the 4 chord to the 2 chord. So this is true in whatever key you're in. And the G major chord can either lift to darken, and you'll need to change that top note of the B minor chord to F sharp so that it's a B minor chord, or the G can skip down to the nearest minor chord, which is E minor, to darken. The whole reason this is interesting to me is that if you have a song where, for example, you're on the C chord for a long time, like Amazing Grace, how F chord sweet the, back to the C chord sound, that saved a wretch like G chord. So if you have a song like that and you're on the C for a while, you could experiment with darkening the C chord by choosing either to lift it to the nearest minor chord, so C to E minor, or lower it to the nearest minor chord, which is A minor. So for example, amazing A minor instead of C. So I'm substituting the darker version of the chord just to add a little nuance and depth to the song. If I lifted it, amazing grace, that makes it feel like it's moving upward, leading you to the next key. And likewise, you'll often find in jazz that instead of ending a song with the 4 chord, 5 chord, 1 chord, in this case F, G, C, they often will substitute for the 4 chord, the F, they'll do D minor instead. So instead of hearing 4, 5, 1, you'll hear 2, which is substituting for the F. So instead of the F, we've jumped down to the D minor chord. 2, 5, back to 1. So dark versions of chords are just another way to add more depth and movement to a major chord instead of just staying on a long time. So that's something you can experiment with. So in any given key, when you're building chords on the 7 notes of the scale, it will always be that chords 1, 4, and 5, built on the 1st, 4th, and 5th notes of the scale, are going to be major, and chords 2, 3, and 6 are going to be minor. And that's true in whatever key you're in. So if you're in the key of C, your C major, F major, and G chords are your 1, 4, 5 chords. You can take those major chords and darken or soften them by skipping up or down, for example, to the nearest minor chord. And the reason it works in a song if you're substituting a minor chord for a major chord is that they share 2 notes in common. So another way to look at this is your 1, 4, and 5 chords in a given key are major, and each one can either lift up to a dark chord, and by that I mean skipping up to the nearest one, or that same major chord can drop down to the closest minor chord. So you can darken a major chord by dropping down to the nearest minor or by lifting up to the nearest minor, and each one will have a specific feel. So C can drop down to A minor, or it can darken by lifting up to E minor, and each of those chords have 2 notes in common. Same thing with F. It can darken by dropping down to the D minor, or it can darken by lifting up to the A minor. Again, they share 2 notes in common. And same thing with the G chord. You can darken it by dropping down to the E minor, or by lifting up to the B minor, one note of which is altered to make it be a B minor instead of a B diminished. So play around with that whenever you're on a major chord for a long time in a song. You can experiment with just changing to the nearest minor chord and seeing how that sounds. So experiment with that when you're hanging out on a chord for a while. Just darken it up. See how that sounds. So this, for example, is C darkening to A minor, C darkening to E minor. Each one has a different feel. It lifts and darkens, or it drops and darkens. So there you go. Have some fun with that, and we'll see you next time.